My hope, though, is that now that we've got some time to catch our breath and take a look at this carefully. People understand that refugees who end up in the United States are the most vetted. Scrutinized, thoroughly investigated individuals that ever arrive on American shores. That the process that's been constructed over the course of several administrations on a bipartisan basis is extraordinarily thorough and currently takes between 18 to 24 months for somebody to be approved. And so although, on its face, the House legislation simply says, well, we can just certify, and this is not along the lines of some of the more radical proposals that we were hearing. Earlier in the week from some presidential candidates, the fact of the matter is, that if it gums up the work so much, then effectively you don't end up seeing any refugees admitted. If you layer it with more and more bureaucracy, that doesn't actually make us safer because it doesn't do a better job of screening, but simply makes it almost impossible to process individuals who are coming in. Then you're effectively ending the refugee program for people who desperately need it. And when I referred to a betrayal of our values, I was being very specific about some of the commentary that was made that would suggest, for example, that we might let Christians in but not Muslims. That we're so fearful that a 4-year-old orphan might be let in. And those of you who joined me to the refugee center yesterday and you saw those kids. That's who we're talking about. If you are a parent and you saw those kids, and you thought about what they had gone through, The notion that we couldn't find a home for them anywhere in the United States of America, that is contrary to our values. And the good news is that the overwhelming majority of the people who know that we are screening and all the precautions that are already taken if they saw those kids. They'd say, yeah, we need to do right by those children. So with respect to Prime Minister Najib, I don't comment on investigations happening back in the United States. I certainly am not going to comment on any investigations or legal proceedings that may be taking place in a foreign country where I'm a visitor. But I did raise with Prime Minister Najib as I have with many of the leaders here in Southeast Asia. But also many leaders in Africa and Latin America and everywhere we go, the importance of transparency. Accountability, the importance of rooting out corruption, all of which are impediments to development. All of which hold countries back, all of which contribute to poverty and stunted growth. And if countries solve those problems, even if they are resource poor and landlocked, they will do better. And if they don't solve those problems, it doesn't matter how much they're blessed by natural resources. Or size, or geography, they're going to fail. And I also emphasize to Prime Minister Najib the importance of civil society and a free press in countries thriving. And every country here is at different levels and stages of development, both social and economic. And we don't expect that everybody follows the same path that the United States does. But I do think there are some basic principles that are important for us. to uphold as friends and partners to the countries that we're talking to. The good news is that take a country like Myanmar. That just went through a historic election after having been subject for 40 years to military rule. They're not going to immediately be Sweden in terms of their democratic practices. But there is a sea change taking place there, and we want to encourage that and engage it. And a lot of the work that we do, the open government partnership that we set up through United Nations. The bilateral work we do in terms of improving transparency, the principles and rules that we've embedded in. TPP, all those things are designed to raise the bar, to have people set sights that are a little bit higher. And some will go forward, some will slip back. Paces will vary, but the trajectory is the same, and that is a world where ordinary people are treated fairly. There's rule of law, there's transparency, governments are accountable. People's voices are heard, women are treated equally, minorities are not discriminated against. Those are profoundly American values, but I also think they are universal values. All right. Thank you, everybody. Let's go home. Barack Obama. Memorial Address for Nelson Mandela. Delivered December 10, 2013, First National Bank Stadium, Johannesburg, South Africa. To Graca Machel and the Mandela family, to President Zuma and members of the government. To heads of states and government, past and present. Distinguished guests, it is a singular honor to be with you today, to celebrate a life like no other. To the people of South Africa, people of every race and walk of life, the world. Thanks you for sharing Nelson Mandela with us. His struggle was your struggle. His triumph was your triumph. Your dignity and your hope found expression in his life. And your freedom, your democracy is his cherished legacy. It is hard to eulogize any man, to capture in words not just the facts and the dates that make a life. But the essential truth of a person, their private joys and sorrows. The quiet moments and unique qualities that illuminate someone's soul. How much harder to do so for a giant of history, who moved a nation toward justice. And in the process moved billions around the world. Born during World War I, far from the corridors of power, a boy raised herding cattle and tutored by the elders of his Thumbu tribe. Madiba would emerge as the last great liberator of the 20th century. Like Gandhi, he would lead a resistance movement, a movement that edits. Start had little prospect for success. Like Dr. King. He would give potent voice to the claims of the oppressed and the moral necessity of racial justice. He would endure a brutal imprisonment that began in the time of Kennedy and Khrushchev. And reached the final days of the Cold War. Emerging from prison, without the force of arms. He would, like Abraham Lincoln, hold his country together when it threatened to break apart. And like America's founding fathers, he would erect a constitutional order to preserve Freedom for future generations, a commitment to democracy and rule of law ratified not only by his election, but by his willingness to step down from power after only one term. Given the sweep of his life, the scope of his accomplishments, the adoration that he so rightly earned, it's tempting, I think, to remember Nelson Mandela as an icon. Smiling and serene, detached from the tawdry affairs of lesser men. But Madiba himself strongly resisted such a lifeless portrait. Instead, Madiba insisted on sharing with us his doubts and his fears. His miscalculations along with his victories. I am not a saint, he said, unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. It was precisely because he could admit to imperfection, because he could be so full of good humor. Even mischief, despite the heavy burdens he carried, that we loved him so. He was not a bust made of marble, he was a man of flesh and blood, a son and a husband, a father and a friend. And that's why we learn so much from him, and that's why we can learn from him still. For nothing he achieved was inevitable. In the arc of his life, we see a man who earned his place in history through struggle and shrewdness and persistence and faith. He tells us what is possible not just in the pages of history books, but in our own lives as well. Mandela showed us the power of action, of taking risks on behalf of our ideals. Perhaps Madiba was right that he inherited a proud rebelliousness, a stubborn sense of fairness from his father. and we know he shared with millions of black and colored South Africans the anger born of 1,000 slights, 1,000 indignities. 1,000 unremembered moments, a desire to fight the system that imprisoned my people, he said. But like other early giants of the ANC, the Sisulus and Tambos Madiba disciplined. His anger and channeled his desire to fight into organization and platforms. And strategies for action, so men and women could stand up for their God-given dignity. Moreover, he accepted the consequences of his actions. Knowing that standing up to powerful interests and injustice carries a price. I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Point 1. Mandela taught us the power of action, but he also taught us the power of ideas, the importance of reason and arguments. The need to study not only those who you agree with, but also those who you don't agree with. He understood that ideas cannot be contained by prison walls, or extinguished by a sniper's bullet. He turned his trial into an indictment of apartheid because of his eloquence and his passion. But also because of his training as an advocate. He used decades in prison to sharpen his arguments. But also to spread his thirst for knowledge to others in the movement. and he learned the language and the customs of his oppressor, so that one day he might better convey to them how their own freedom depend upon his.